Hello and good evening. This is Sky News at 9 o'clock, live from Belfast. Your headlines.
Make sure the Irish Accords and the Windsor Agreement stay in place. Keep the peace.
The message from US President Joe Biden as he heads to Northern Ireland 25 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. His visit comes at a time of heightened security after police in Derry, Londonderry, discover 4 suspected pipe bombs in a cemetery.
Tonight's other news this hour, as the junior doctor strike puts the NHS under more pressure, ministers accuse them of putting patient safety at risk. Police in Kentucky revealed the gunman who killed 5 colleagues at a bank in Louisville bought his weapon legally a week ago. The boss of Britain's biggest business group, the CBI, is sacked over misconduct allegations its board says have been serious failings. And the SNP's finances under the spotlight again as the party's new leader reveals auditors quit last autumn and he's only just found out.
Hello and good evening from Belfast, where we are expecting President Joe Biden to arrive at Belfast International Airport within the next 30 minutes or so. He's coming here to mark and celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, an agreement that largely brought an end to 3 decades of political violence. He'll spend time on both sides of the border during the next 4 days, and tomorrow he's going to make a speech here at Ulster University. Now, earlier today, police discovered 4 suspected pipe bombs in a cemetery near Derry, Londonderry, close to an area where petrol bombs were thrown at police vehicles yesterday. It's just a reminder of the tense security situation here at this sensitive time. Now, though, we are waiting for the president to fly into Belfast International, where he's going to be greeted by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for a handshake. Now, before he left the United States, Mr. Biden said that his top priority was to make sure the Irish Accords and the Windsor Agreement stay in place. Our senior Ireland correspondent David Blevins reports.
It's a well-worn path from the White House. 4 of the last 5 presidents have visited Northern Ireland, each pledging America's help in preserving peace.
What's your top priority on this trip, sir?
Make sure the Irish Accords and the Windsor Agreement stay in place. Keep the peace.
Joe Biden welcomed the UK's deal with the EU on post-Brexit trading arrangements, and his presence could help restore power sharing, according to the First Minister-designate.
I think it's hugely important given the year that we're in, because the Americans have such skin in the game, if you like. They were part of bringing about the Good Friday Agreement. So I think to come this year is hugely significant, particularly given that they're very much focused on the next 25 years. They're focused on economic investment here. So they really want to look towards the future, as do we.
Bill Clinton was the first US president to make the trip to Belfast, marking the terrorist ceasefires at Christmas 1995.
Hillary and I thank you from the bottom of our hearts for making us feel so very, very welcome in Belfast and Northern Ireland.
And they've just kept coming since. America keen to express its support for the Good Friday Agreement at every opportunity.
And to those who choose the path of peace, I promise you, the United States of America will support you.
But not everyone has chosen that path. It's still a fragile peace, and there's a massive security operation in place. The threat level in Northern Ireland has risen from substantial to severe, meaning a terrorist attack is deemed highly likely. The threat isn't directed against the president himself, but his visit takes place against a backdrop of dissident Republicans targeting police, and there'll be a significant increase in the number of them deployed operationally while he's in Northern Ireland. Each key location will have been thoroughly searched and locked down, says Jim Gamble, a former Assistant Chief Constable.
At the end of the day, you don't need to be particularly sophisticated to disrupt an event like this. It's as cheap as a phone call. So you've got to be confident that if an anonymous threat comes in, that the security precautions that you've put in place are sufficiently tight that you can say that's not possible.
He'll spend most of the week in the Republic of Ireland. The ties run deep between the two nations. 40 million Americans claiming Irish descent. But this is personal for Joe Biden. He'll revisit his ancestral homeland, Louth and Mayo, where he's guaranteed Céad Míle Fáilte, 100,000 welcomes.
All right, let me just run you through in a bit more detail the president's schedule as you understand it from this evening. Now, he's going to land in about 20 minutes or so at Belfast International in Air Force One, where he's going to be met by the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. They're going to hold a bilateral meeting tomorrow morning. Then the president is due to meet the political leaders from the 5 main parties here in Northern Ireland before he delivers a keynote speech here at Ulster University's new Belfast campus. Now, once he leaves Belfast tomorrow, he's going to travel on to the Republic of Ireland for a number of engagements in County Louth, where, as David said in his report there, he has ancestral roots. He'll be visiting Carlingford Castle before spending the night in Dublin. Now, on Thursday, he is expected to meet the Irish President, Michael D. Higgins, and the Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, and address the Irish Parliament, as well as attend a banquet at Dublin Castle in the evening. Now, his trip's going to conclude on Friday with a visit to County Mayo, where he has more family, and he'll make a public speech at the cathedral in Ballina. Well, our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, is here with me now. And David, we're seeing there are more police arriving here ahead of Biden's speech. A big security operation in force.
Yes, and we think that security operation will swing up to a higher level even within the next hour. This area going into lockdown in preparation for the president coming to make that address at the university tomorrow. I think the fact that he's not going to Parliament buildings at Stormont, where there is no power-sharing government at the moment, but coming here is an indication perhaps that he thinks it's up to the next generation to make the hopes of the Good Friday Agreement a reality. But there is a very tense security situation. We know that the threat level was raised last month. MI5 will have made that decision separate from any government involvement on the basis of the current intelligence. And that's because they're concerned that dissident Republicans still pursuing the objective of Irish unity by violent means could continue their efforts to attack police officers, as we saw with the attempted murder of a senior officer last month in County Tyrone. There will also be concerns about loyalist paramilitaries, of course, who remain active as well, and they're very angry about the Brexit border in the Irish Sea. So a number of officers who would normally be on desk duties have been deployed operationally onto the streets, and of course that makes them a target. And we've also been informed that 300 police officers have been drafted in from Great Britain to lend their support as well.
Yeah, there is a large security presence in force, David. As you say, this area is about to go into lockdown. Let's just talk about Biden's involvement in all of this. We're expecting him, as we say, in the next 10, 15 minutes or so. He's going to come here with a message of hope, a message of trying to build consensus. But he's got to be careful exactly how he tries to deliver that message.
Yes, and not least because Joe Biden is seen as a very Irish-American president, so there's a risk of him antagonising the Unionists rather than encouraging them to become part of the power-sharing government again. He's been very open about the fact that he has deep ancestral roots in the Republic of Ireland. He has made jokes in the past, clearly indicating that perhaps his view is that there should be Irish unity rather than Northern Ireland remaining part of the United Kingdom. But it does, of course, because under the Good Friday Agreement, the key principle of consent is that it will remain part of the United Kingdom until the majority here vote otherwise. And that's why Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is at Belfast International Airport this evening to welcome him, because he is going to very briefly be in one corner of the United Kingdom on this visit. But it's primarily about a visit to Ireland. He's going to Dublin very quickly tomorrow, where he will, as you say, meet with the President, meet with the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, the Prime Minister, and address a joint session of the upper and lower houses of Parliament. That's really the focus.
Yeah, and as we're talking, David, you can see the tarmac there at Belfast International. The stairs are out already. They're prepared early for Air Force One to be touching down. It's expected about 20 past, and you say once it lands, there's quite a long taxi to get to that point, is there?
Yes, some people may wonder why Air Force One is heading to Belfast International Airport, which is about 30-40 minutes outside of the city, rather than going to the George Best Belfast City Airport just on the outskirts of the city. The answer is very simple. The runway at George Best Belfast City Airport isn't long enough to accommodate Air Force One. That's why it always goes to what people people in Northern Ireland describe as Aldergrove Airport. That's its old name, but it is the international airport these days. That's where he will arrive. He departed Washington, as you say, this afternoon, telling reporters that he was coming here to recommit America to preserving peace in Northern Ireland. And even as we talk about the fragile peace in Northern Ireland, we can hear and we can see that the security operation is ramping up around us here.
Yeah, there are far more blue lights than there were a little while before. So look, when he finally gets here and he first of all sits down with Rishi Sunak and they have that bilateral, they're going to be sort of hashing out the benefits of the Windsor framework. That has been put in place to replace the Northern Ireland Protocol, and this is the thing that's meant to bring the Assembly back together and get it functioning again. Do you think Rishi Sunak's going to try and advise him how he wants, when he eventually meets those leaders, to discuss that and the benefits that he thinks he sees in it?
Yes, I would imagine that he will. The Prime Minister put a huge effort into trying to resolve the difficult post-Brexit trading arrangements, which have caused such a problem. Brexit was never really ever compatible with the Northern Ireland peace process because it was always going to require a border somewhere, and the border has been invisible for the best part of 3 decades now between Northern Ireland and the Republic. The renewed focus on the border has been a significant political problem, and in an effort to avoid a border on this island again, of course, Boris Johnson did what he said no British Prime Minister could ever do, and that was establish a trade border in the Irish Sea between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And that's a big problem for unionists who believe they've now been cast adrift to some extent. They believe that raises the constitutional question of where Northern Ireland's future lies. But it's interesting this afternoon to hear Joe Biden talk about the Windsor framework. He's clearly very well informed about recent political developments, about that deal Rishi Sunak has done with the EU to try and resolve these difficulties. And the Prime Minister must be very disappointed that the DUP are still not content enough to restore power-sharing government. That's what he hoped would happen for the 25th anniversary. And if it had happened, I have no doubt whatsoever that Joe Biden would not be coming to the new £360 million campus of Ulster University, but would be going to address the Northern Ireland Assembly.
I think that's where they all want him to be addressing them if that power-sharing executive could get back underway. And it was interesting that he mentioned the Windsor framework on his way here. That suggests he's got himself a little bit abreast of some of the details, the intricacies of all of this, because he's going to come here, big picture, it's consensus, we're going to try and maintain peace. There's some real sort of nuances that he needs to be aware of, and as you said earlier, make sure he doesn't say the wrong thing that then antagonises one side that could scupper it.
Yes, and I suppose what he wants to do is to build on the work that America has done in the past in terms of the peace process in Northern Ireland. Remember, it was way back in 1994 that Bill Clinton's involvement here helped pave the way to the provisional IRA ceasefire when he famously visited that historic trip back in Christmas 1995. There was a lot of debate about whether or not he could be seen to publicly shake the hand of Gerry Adams, then the Sinn Féin leader, the world's most recognisable Irish Republican. So that was facilitated not in a formal way, but informally when the president went walkabout on the Falls Road. Gerry Adams just happened to be there, and we witnessed the famous handshake. Bill Clinton's envoy, Senator George Mitchell, was the man who then brokered the Good Friday Agreement. So there has been a significant investment, and what we have, a political investment I'm talking about, but America's always been very careful to combine the political investment with talk about economic investment.
Yeah, and there has been talk about that before this trip has even got underway, that there's a deal to be done in some ways, that there can be more inward investment into this part of Britain once the executive gets back underway.
That in itself, I think, is an indication that they understand the sensitivity, that for some it's a step too far for America to be politically involved at a significant level in the Northern Ireland peace process. So by talking about economic investment, you soften that a little bit. And of course, the one thing that just may encourage politicians to get back into Stormont and to restore the power-sharing government is the suggestion that it will lead to American investment and more jobs here in Northern Ireland, because that's what matters to most people here.
Yeah, absolutely right. OK, David, plenty more from you throughout the evening as we await the arrival of President Biden into Belfast International. But of course, President Biden massively proud of his Irish roots. And our US correspondent James Matthews has been getting some more detail on his background from his home time in the US.
Scranton, Pennsylvania. A city very American, very Irish American. Through the years, it's counted a quarter of its population as Irish descendant, including the Scranton boy, who made the big stage.
To have somebody in power who's Irish, who's very proud of where he came from, even though maybe not being born in Ireland, it's a really cool thing.
It is such an amazing thing to be Irish.
And the president, he seems proud.
Oh yes, very proud.
A young baseball-loving Joe Biden lived at this Scranton house until he was 10 years old. It was the home of his grandfather, Ambrose Finnegan. He was told many times the story of his Irish roots. It's a story he's clearly never forgotten.
My grandfather, Ambrose Finnegan, every time I walk out of his house, he'd say, "Joey, remember, the best drop of blood in you is Irish."
Joe Biden themed the White House Irish for St. Patrick's Day. This a president whose ancestors crossed the Atlantic in the 19th century, the Finnegans of County Louth and the Blewitts of County Mayo. Behind a green door in Washington, we heard of the Biden contribution to peace in Northern Ireland. Stella O'Leary is the president's appointee to the International Fund.
He's a hero.
As a senator, Joe Biden helped set up the fund to promote peaceful coexistence in Northern Ireland.
That was in existence starting from 1986. So it also formed the foundation of the peace agreement. So it's been a long time, and Joe Biden was in there from the start.
5, 6, 7, go.
This president knows the place and a process that's long taken one step forward and two steps back.
Back, back.
This week, he'll celebrate the progress he helped to promote. James Matthews, Sky News, in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
All right, well, let's bring in now Laurie Watkins, former policy advisor to President Obama. And Laurie, good to have you with us. We saw there in James's piece Biden's hometown of Scranton, and really the way that he shows his pride of being Irish. I mean, how does that play for him politically at the moment?
Do you mean over there, or do you mean here in the U.S.? How does it play politically?
I mean, in the U.S.
Yes, in the U.S., I think that the average American equates or relates to, or associates is the word I should use, the Irish to hardworking, tough roots, tough blood, to working class folks.
I think we may have lost the line to Laurie there, which is a shame, but thankfully David Blevins is still here. He knows everything, even the length of the runway at Belfast International. So David, I was just putting to Laurie there the way that President Biden plays to his Irish heritage in a US context. Give us a thought on that and how you think that works for him over there.
40 million people in the United States claim Irish descent. There's about 4.5 million people living on the island of Ireland. So some people would say, what, you've got 9 times as many people in America claiming to be Irish as here in Ireland, on this island itself. And that, I think, tells you why this matters, especially when you're considering running for a second term in the White House. That's a significant vote. And that's why Joe Biden will be actually the 8th US president to come to Ireland. He's only the 4th to come to Northern Ireland, but he will be the 8th to come to the Republic of Ireland. And they nearly always come towards the end or in the second half of their first term. So there is clearly an electoral card at play here in terms of this visit as well.
Certainly is. All right, David, thank you for that. And I think we've got the line back to Laurie. Laurie Watkins, I think you can hear us again now. I don't know if you heard what David was saying, just the importance of the Irish American vote, some 40 million Irish Americans in the US, and I'm now told that Laurie has frozen once again, but without fail. Thankfully, David Blevins hasn't stepped away, even though it's freezing cold. I know you want to go and sit in the car, but David, you're still with me. Let's move on to a subject that you're far more comfortable. Although it's a fantastic answer about the Irish Americans, we can take you now to Belfast International Airport, where I am told President Joe Biden is landed. He has arrived, and we are now, if you can see there, looking at what is the presidential 747 Air Force One has arrived in Northern Ireland. President Joe Biden, the fourth US president to come to the north of Ireland. Packed schedule ahead of him, which will begin once he finishes his taxi in Air Force One and makes his way there to, as you can see, the waiting steps, with a handshake and a meeting with the UK Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. So, David, as we see that Air Force One has now touched down in Northern Ireland, President Biden's historic visit to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement begins.
Yes, and I think it is just an indication of the extent to which the United States has invested so much political capital in Northern Ireland and its effort to move from conflict to a lasting peace. It is 27 years since Air Force One first landed at Belfast International Airport, transporting the then President Bill Clinton and First Lady Hillary Clinton, who went on, of course, to become Secretary of State, but also happens to be right now the Chancellor of Queen's University in Belfast, and the Clintons themselves will be here next week to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. But since then, we've had 4 presidents in total come here to recommit America to the preservation of peace and to express their support for the power-sharing government in Northern Ireland. So it's always a hugely significant thing to see Air Force One landing in Northern Ireland, a place with a population of fewer than 2 million people. And yet we see the leader of the free world coming here on a fairly regular basis these days.
Yeah, and the city centre, as we said earlier, is in lockdown. And once he arrives and meets with Rishi Sunak, he'll get a few hours rest and then the work begins.
Yes, and just look at that entourage preparing for his arrival here in Northern Ireland. I'm told somewhere in the region of 1,000 people have travelled from the United States as part of that entourage. Secret Service have been here for some time. They'll have been carrying out defensive searches across every key location to ensure that there is no possibility of the President being in danger given the increased terror threat. But as we were explaining earlier, Kamali, the threat is not directed against the President of the United States. It is from dissident Republicans primarily pursuing Irish unity, still by violent means, and they're intent on attacking police officers. And we're going to see a significant increase in the number of police officers visibly present on the streets of Northern Ireland over the next 24 hours. There's been a significant redeployment, not just from officers who would normally be at their desks in Northern Ireland, but from their colleagues in Great Britain coming to offer support as well.
Yeah, and as we say, he's going to meet Rishi Sunak once he gets off the presidential jet, and that's a meeting that not only is significant to Northern Ireland, but also the relationship between the US and the UK right now is key, not least because of the war in Ukraine.
Yes, and there's been a lot of discussion between the White House and Downing Street over the last couple of weeks about exactly how this is going to play out. And it's because this is the only corner of the United Kingdom that President Biden is visiting on this trip. And we already know, for example, that he will not be attending the King's coronation in May. So Rishi Sunak, of course, as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, will be the person who greets him at the foot of the steps when the President steps out shortly. We hope it can take them a little while to freshen up after the long journey across the Atlantic. Yes. But I can see the welcoming party, including the Lord Lieutenant, the Queen's representative, or the King's representative, I should say, in Northern Ireland, making his way now to the foot of the steps. So they are preparing clearly for him to step off fairly shortly.
I guess those steps that we were looking at before with someone else, of course, the President brings his own steps when they arrive somewhere. So we are now awaiting President Joe Biden to disembark Air Force One, become the fourth president to arrive here in Northern Ireland in this part of the UK for what will be a historic visit. He is here to commemorate, to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, and he really has a packed schedule ahead of him. He will be spending some time as well speaking to the leaders, the 5 leaders of the main parties here in Northern Ireland, in an attempt to try and gain some kind of consensus, get power sharing back in line. Now, as we continue to watch his picture, if you look closely there in the middle of shot, you can definitely see that is Prime Minister Rishi Sunak there in the dark suit, awaiting. There he is. shaking hands there with the awaiting dignitaries, and that looks like the presidential vehicle has pulled up. What do they call that one? The Beast?
The Beast,
I think it's
yes.
there, ready for President Biden to be driven in it. And it's about a 30-minute drive, you said, from Belfast International into the city centre, and he'll be entering the cordon and going to a large city centre hotel.
Yes, and when Bill and Hillary Clinton famously became the first couple from the White House to visit Northern Ireland in 1995, they made the courageous decision to stay in the famous Europa Hotel in the city centre,
why is that famous,
which
David?
was, at that time, the most bombed hotel in Western Europe. The President isn't staying in the Europa. Normally they keep these things under wraps, but it's difficult to do that when you have this scale of a security operation. We know he's staying in a hotel in a street parallel to the Europa. That's where he'll make his way this evening. He's not going to get a lot of sleep. He has an early start in the morning, as you say. He's going to have a brief meeting with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. He will then come here to Ulster University to address an audience of around 400 people, we think, and to meet with the 5 main party leaders, including the Sinn Féin First Minister designate, Michelle O'Neill, and with Jeffrey Donaldson, the leader of the Democratic Unionists, who, of course, is refusing to bring his party back into the power-sharing arrangement at Stormont because of the Brexit order in the Irish Sea.
Now, I'm told that meeting with those leaders is going to be a meet and greet. Are you getting a sense they're all going to meet as 5-on-1, or maybe with Rishi Sunak there as well, or will they get some little individual sort of breakout meetings, do we think?
I think it'll be a very short encounter, each of them all in one room, off to the side. At the moment, I'm told by our friends at the US Consulate in Belfast that meeting will not be on camera. That may change. This is a very fluid situation, as you know, in terms of the political sensitivities, but no doubt his message to them, both privately and publicly, will be that it's time to restore the power-sharing government in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, David. And there he is, President Joseph R. Biden, the 46th President of the United States, making his way down the steps to be greeted from behind that presidential limo there with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. A salute.
A warm welcome from the Lord Lieutenant for County Antrim, the King's representative in that part of Northern Ireland, and all smiles from the Prime Minister. Very keen to welcome the Prime Minister. And
Senator Joe Kennedy there, I think, is the new Northern Ireland representative from the US government who is here on this visit, playing a key role. He's going to be staying on, I understand, once President Biden does go back, to try and ensure that the US government role in trying to get consensus back and get power sharing back at Stormont keeps having that sort of impetus.
Yes, and the White House has, over the years, had many envoys to Northern Ireland, including Senator George Mitchell himself, who spent 4 years here brokering the historic compromise between the political parties. But isn't it interesting to see Joe Kennedy appointed as an envoy to Northern Ireland these days? In many ways, we've come full circle.
Funny how history does that, right?
Because, indeed, because it was President John F. Kennedy you could describe as the most Irish American of all presidents. Wexford in the west, on the east coast of Ireland, and made it from Wexford to the White House in the space of 1 generation.
It's not a bad journey. Well, as you said, David, all smiles now as the president is finally here, as we said, the 4th president to come to this part of the United Kingdom. A quick chat there with Rishi Sunak, and as you say, David, he's got a packed schedule ahead of him. So once he's done the meet and greet and said the right things and all the pleasantries, will be whisked off into the city where I guess the work will begin on preparing for that speech. And you say it's going to be a speech to students, to some 400 people. I'm told it's going to be about 25 minutes long. I mean, what do you expect the tone of it to be?
I think it's interesting that he's coming to talk to the next generation in Northern Ireland. That perhaps suggests that he isn't so confident that the political leaders of today are going to manage to restore the power-sharing government and to see the hopes of the Good Friday Agreement become a reality. And therefore he is going to come here and send that message to a wider audience that it's time to embrace the hopes of Northern Ireland, in the hopes that were established way back on the 10th of April 1998, on that day when Senator George Mitchell uttered those famous 19 words, I'm pleased to announce that the two governments and the political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement. It was really a very momentous day in Northern Ireland, coming just 4 years after the terrorist organisations had declared ceasefires. And it was really a masterstroke in terms of creative ambiguity, because it allowed both unionists and nationalists to claim that they had achieved something. Unionists achieved the principle of consent, that Northern Ireland will remain part of the United Kingdom until a majority here vote otherwise. Of course, we saw prisoners released early from prison as part of the Good Friday Agreement, and all of the terrorist organisations pledged to destroy their weapons. So you really couldn't exaggerate the significance of that day.
Yeah, it was incredible in being able to give people on both sides exactly what they wanted. As we continue to look at these pictures, it does strike me that this is a family affair. We can see Dr. Jill Biden there in the foreground, and off to the right of screen there, that looks to me like Hunter Biden, the president's son there. I know that the Bidens did travel to Ireland back in 2017 to check out their ancestry and the genealogy, and just to confirm whereabouts in the Republic they are from. And of course, as we said, later on this week, they're going to be making a similar journey to County Louth and County Mayo.
There's no doubt whatsoever that the President is very proud of his Irish ancestry, having visited as Vice President both those ancestral counties of Louth and Mayo. And you will remember during his election campaign just how often he quoted the poetry of Seamus Heaney. So I think the President really has a sense of connection with Irish culture, with Irish heritage. And how many times do we hear him saying, I'm Irish? Yeah. At one stage we had that significant moment where someone stepped forward to doorstep him, as we say in the media, and they said, I'm from the BBC, and he said, I'm Irish. So he didn't want to talk to the British Broadcasting Corporation. That's how Irish Joe Biden considers himself.
Said with a smile. I don't know if you'd be able to say that sort of thing now. But, well, look, we can see that the delegations are getting into the limo, into the beast. They're going to be driving away from Belfast International, having done the handshakes, said their hellos. You know, they've just come across the Atlantic. They must be tired, and there is plenty of work ahead for this US delegation here in Ireland, not least in Northern Ireland, but also once they get to the Republic, to try and continue to build on that 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. And one thought I did want to get from you, David, is this sense of President Biden kind of stepping on what has gone before. Of course, such a huge moment 25 years ago when that agreement was made. Power sharing was broken down. How much do you think Biden feels like it is incumbent on him as a Democrat and as an Irishman to try and help this thing along a little bit?
Well, America has always been incredibly, staunchly defensive of the Good Friday Agreement, not least because they consider it perhaps President Bill Clinton's finest moment in terms of foreign policy achievement. And of course, this is another Democratic president in office now, considering a run for a second term. So he wants to demonstrate that same level of commitment, not just in Ireland, but in the Northern Ireland peace process. And at every time we've seen a president here, it seems to be at a significant moment. Bill Clinton came because the terrorist ceasefires had been declared. He visited on a number of occasions, not least soon after the bombing of Omagh in 1998, the largest single atrocity. So now we have another president setting foot on Northern Irish soil at a time when there is a political difficulty, which has been caused, of course, by the consequences of Brexit.
Yeah, and what do you think the reaction is going to be from the leaders of those parties when he meets them tomorrow? Very set on either side of this and unwilling to compromise. I mean, voting against the agreement that the DUP did in the Commons just recently. A president comes across the Atlantic to talk to them. What kind of reception do you think he's going to get?
Well, you heard in my report earlier this hour, the Sinn Féin Deputy Leader, Michelle O'Neill, who's the first nationalist to have been elected to the office of First Minister Designate, says this is always significant because of what she describes as America's skin in the game, because America has invested so much in Northern Ireland. And she says it's really important for him to come here to express this level of support politically and economically. And there we have the Prime Minister also just about to depart Belfast International Airport and make his way to his own hotel overnight, where he'll be doing some preparation for that important meeting with the US President in the morning.
The Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris as well, who's also got work to do. I mean, it just sort of reinforces, doesn't it? You know, power sharing has been broken down for a couple of years now. doesn't seem like it's getting closer to coming back. So these top-level politicians will really want to see if they can drive it forward a bit. And I guess there was a lot of that in 97 with the Good Friday Agreement. You had a new government come in, you had a lot of exhaustion from all those years of violence. That can happen in politics, can't it? You can suddenly get like a little bit of impetus, a little bit of oomph that gives something a push.
Molly, I'm impressed. Your eyesight's better than mine, being able to pick out Chris Heaton-Harris in the dark at Belfast International Airport this evening. But he is a man, obviously, with a lot of work to do because of the difficulties at Stormont. As Northern Ireland Secretary, he has effectively had to step in to govern this place with a small team around him for a period of time. Not that that is a return to the formalities of direct rule from Westminster we would have seen before there was a devolved government in Northern Ireland. There is a problem right now. We know the problem exists because the DUP are boycotting the power-sharing government over Brexit, and that means Northern Ireland does not have a functioning government right now. And that's something we've seen many times, the collapse of the Northern Ireland Assembly, the collapse of the power-sharing executive over the last 25 years. The reason for that, and I suppose to some extent it is the flaw in the Good Friday Agreement. Mandatory coalition requires the largest unionist party and the largest nationalist party to agree if there is to be a power-sharing government. So the moment there's a dispute between them over anything, that government collapses. But that political mechanism, which effectively gives a veto to the largest unionist party and the largest nationalist party, squeezes out the middle ground. Their votes don't seem to be just as valuable. And that's why many people are calling for a restructuring of the system, because the political mechanism that is the Good Friday Agreement to underscore a fragile peace here or underpin a fragile peace here is also the very thing that often causes the political paralysis.
Right, well, David, if you continue to look at these pictures from Belfast International Airport, you can see tarmac clear, the beast is rolling, President Joe Biden on his way, the short drive, 30-40 minutes from the outskirts of the city into the city centre, where he's going to overnight before he begins his packed schedule to mark the anniversary of the 25th signing of the Good Friday Agreement, and also spend time in the Republic of Ireland, in his ancestral homelands in both County Louth and County Mayo, and we'll be fitting in a good couple of keynote speeches. There he is, President Biden, making his way into Belfast city centre. Yeah, a couple of keynote speeches, one here at Ulster University and also one at the Irish Parliament in Dublin. Well, there you have it. President Joe Biden has arrived in Northern Ireland, the fourth US president to do so, greeted there by dignitaries including the US ambassador to the UK and, of course, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Those two are going to hold a bilateral meeting tomorrow. It's going to be longer than this little chat they had on the tarmac. Of course, plenty for them to discuss, not least the war in Ukraine and the Windsor Framework and trying to get power sharing back up and underway. Well, that's all from us here in Belfast. From me and David, it's back to Anna.